Let me ask you a question. Who's really in charge of your house? It sounds pretty simple, right? But the answer can actually reveal these hidden dynamics that cause a whole lot of stress. Today, we're going to dive into the work of a retired clinical psychologist, Lasater, and break down a concept he calls the overfunction slash underfunction dynamic. And this gets right to the heart of who really holds the power in a family.
So, before we get into the messy stuff, let's just set the stage with what the ideal looks like. What are we all really aiming for in a healthy family? Well, it pretty much boils down to a partnership of equals.
So just take a second, think about it honestly. Who really runs your household? The answer might be way more complicated than you think, and it's key to everything we're about to talk about.
Okay, so the main goal here is a balanced system. And look, that doesn't mean a perfect 50-50 split on every single little thing. Life's not like that. It's about a fair and mutually agreed upon way of sharing responsibilities and power, where everybody feels respected, feels heard, and feels like they're on the same team, working toward the same goals. That's the benchmark. That's what we're aiming for.
But of course, life isn't always that neat and tidy. So what happens when those perfectly balanced scales start to tip? Well, this is where we get into the core concept of this whole explainer. The term for it is overfunction slash underfunction. Basically, it describes a pattern where over time, one person starts taking on more and more of the load. The decisions, the chores, the emotional weight, while the other person starts to back away or give up that responsibility. It's not something that happens overnight. It's this slow creep that can completely change how a family works. And you've got to see both sides of this coin. The overfunctioning person, the one doing everything, they're not some happy hero. A lot of times their behavior is driven by anxiety, by this deep need for control, and they end up feeling totally exhausted and pretty resentful. But here's the thing. The underfunctioning person isn't just kicking back and enjoying a free ride. A lot of times they feel dominated, powerless, and they can start to act out or rebel. It really is a lose-lose situation for everyone involved. Now, here's a really crucial point. Not every imbalance is a crisis, okay? Life happens. If someone gets sick or loses their job, it is totally natural and healthy for their partner to step up and take on more for a little while. What we're talking about here is when that temporary situation becomes a chronic, unchanging pattern.
And that's when the real problems start. A long-term imbalance has a very, very high cost, not just for the couple, but for the entire family. So let's take a look at what can trigger it and what the consequences really are. The triggers are often these huge life events that, let's be honest, we can all recognize. Having kids, a big change at work, or really serious challenges like mental health issues or addiction. Any of these can kick this dynamic into motion. Sometimes it happens just because one partner is naturally very dominant, and over time they just kind of erode the other's power. And this feeling has serious consequences. I mean, when the person who's running the show feels this constant exhaustion and resentment, it's just a recipe for burnout. This can lead to actual health problems, crippling anxiety, and a total breakdown of intimacy and communication. And on the other side, it's just as bad. Feeling controlled and incompetent can lead to depression or just a total lack of motivation in life. Or it can spark that rebellion we were talking about, which creates a home that's just filled with constant, draining conflict. And we absolutely cannot forget the kids. Children who grow up in this kind of environment are learning a really distorted model for what a partnership is. They might grow up to be overly responsible for everyone around them, or they might learn to be passive and just expect everyone else to fix their problems. Either way, this pattern can set them up for their own relationship struggles as adults.
Okay, so that's the problem. It's heavy stuff, I know. But here's the good news. These patterns can be changed. So let's shift gears and talk about the path to recovery and how a family can actually begin to rebalance their whole system. According to Lasater, the path forward always starts with just acknowledging the problem. I mean, you can't fix what you don't admit is broken, right? From there, if the root cause is something really serious like addiction or domestic violence, you absolutely need specialized treatment. And a key recommendation he makes is turning to group therapy. So why group therapy? Well, think about it. Issues like addiction and controlling behaviors are wrapped in all these layers of denial and defensiveness. A single therapist might really struggle to break through all that. But a group of peers? They have the objectivity and, frankly, the power to challenge those defenses in a way one person just can't. And that is often the key to a real breakthrough. And this leads us to the most difficult part of this whole discussion. Recovery has to be a two-way street. What happens when one person in this dynamic simply refuses to change?
And this is just the hard truth of it. You can't force someone to get help. If the person who's over-controlling or struggling with an addiction is just unwilling to be part of the solution, the rest of the family gets backed into a corner, and they're left with a truly, truly difficult choice.
And so we're left with this really powerful question from Lasater's work. If one person won't change, how do you restore sanity for everyone else? There's no easy answer here, but just recognizing the dynamic, seeing the pattern of over and under functioning for what it is, that is the first essential step. It's the point where the rest of the family can start to make choices that lead toward their own health and healing, even if that path forward is incredibly difficult.